Stop acting like a victim, Daniel. You are broke. You have nothing left.
I lost everything. And this is how you see me.
No, this is who you've always been. I was just too blind to see it.
Where were you tonight?
Don't start this.
Don't start this again.
Were you with Mark? What if I was?
Everything stopped. Welcome to Echo Tales by Ken, where stories reveal the truth behind human choices. And sometimes the people closest to us hide the darkest secrets. Before we go on, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. 3 weeks earlier, everything was different. Daniel Kingsley wasn't just another man trying to make ends meet. At 39, he had built an empire most people could only dream of. Real estate, tech investments, silent partnerships. His wealth stretched far beyond what anyone could see on the surface. But Daniel had one rule. No one he dated ever knew the full truth. Not anymore. The last time he let someone in, it cost him more than money. It cost him trust. So when Margaret came into his life, things felt different. She was confident, elegant. In her mid-30s, she carried herself like a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to say it. They met at a quiet charity event. She didn't approach him because of money. In fact, she didn't even know he had any. And that was exactly what caught Daniel's attention. "I like simple things," she had told him that night, smiling over a glass of wine. Peace, honesty, real connection. Not all that fake rich people drama. Daniel had smiled. He had heard that before. But something about her felt convincing. Or maybe he just wanted to believe it. Fast forward a few months, and Margaret had moved into his life. Slowly, naturally. At least that's what it seemed like. Daniel never introduced her to his real world. Instead, he created a version of himself. A comfortable man, but not wealthy. He drove a modest car, lived in a decent apartment, spoke vaguely about business, and watched. At first, Margaret was perfect. She cooked for him, checked in on him, supported him emotionally. It felt real, too real. But then, little things started to change. "You're too comfortable," she said one evening, scrolling through her phone. "Don't you ever think about doing more?" Daniel looked up from his laptop. "Doing more how?" "I don't know," she shrugged. "Building something bigger, making real money, living better." Daniel leaned back slightly. There it was. Not loud, not obvious, but there, the shift. "I'm okay with where I am," he said calmly. Margaret didn't respond, but her silence said enough. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the warmth began to fade. Calls became shorter. Replies became delayed. The laughter between them less frequent. Then came the comparisons. "You know Tasha's boyfriend just bought her a new car? Some men actually think about the future. You're a good man, Daniel, but sometimes I wonder if that's enough." Each word landed softly, but cut deep. And then Mark entered the picture. Mark was Daniel's friend, or at least someone he trusted enough to keep around. Confident, charming, always knew what to say. Margaret seemed to enjoy his presence a little too much. At first, Daniel ignored it. Then he noticed it. The way she laughed harder at his jokes. The way her tone changed when she spoke to him. The way Mark lingered just a little too long. One evening, Daniel walked into the living room and paused. Margaret and Mark were sitting close. Too close. Their conversation stopped the moment he entered. "Oh, hey," Mark said casually, leaning back. "We were just talking." Daniel nodded slowly. "About what?" Margaret smiled quickly. Nothing serious. But something in the air had already shifted, and Daniel felt it. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. He had been here before. And this time, he wasn't going to be the fool again. So, he did what he always did when something didn't feel right. He tested it. The next morning, everything changed. Daniel sat Margaret down. His expression was serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked concerned. "What is it?" He exhaled slowly. "My business is not doing well." Her face changed instantly. Subtle, but unmistakable. "I've lost a lot, he continued. Investments didn't work out. I might have to start over. Silence filled the room. Margaret blinked. Oh, just one word. But it carried everything. That was the moment, the exact moment. Daniel knew the test had begun. And this time, he was going to see it through to the end. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't reveal itself when things are going well. Sometimes, you have to lose everything to see who was never really there to begin with. And over the next 3 weeks, Daniel was about to discover just how far betrayal could go. The next morning felt colder than usual. Margaret moved around the kitchen in silence, her energy distant. Daniel watched her from the doorway. Morning, he said. Yeah, she replied without looking at him. No smile, no warmth, just distance. That was new, and Daniel noticed everything. Days passed, and the shift became impossible to ignore. Margaret stopped asking how his day went, stopped sitting close to him, stopped touching him altogether. Instead, she spent more time on her phone, laughing quietly at messages she never explained, stepping out to take calls, coming back with excuses that didn't quite add up. Who was that? Daniel asked one evening. Just a friend, she said quickly. Which friend? She sighed, irritated. Daniel, why are you suddenly acting like this? He held her gaze. I'm just asking. Well, don't, she snapped. It's annoying. That word lingered in the air. Annoying. That's what he had become. Not a partner. Not someone she cared about. Just an inconvenience. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in the living room, his laptop open. But he wasn't working. He was watching. A small, silent program ran in the background. One he had used before. Messages. Call logs. Patterns. He didn't want to do it this way. But experience had taught him something important. Trust without verification was a risk he couldn't afford again. At first, it was subtle, a number that appeared too often. Late-night texts, deleted conversations. Then, a name, Mark. Daniel leaned back slowly, his jaw tightening. No, he whispered under his breath. But the evidence kept building. Calls at odd hours. Messages that disappeared within minutes. Meetups that didn't match her explanations. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Thursday night. Margaret stood by the mirror, adjusting her hair. You're going out? Daniel asked from the bed. Yeah, she said casually. Just meeting a friend. Which friend? She paused for half a second. Jessica. Daniel nodded slowly. All right. She grabbed her bag and walked out. The door closed. Silence. Daniel didn't move for a few seconds. Then he stood up. Calm. Focused. He picked up his phone, opened the tracker, and followed. The rain had started again by the time he got into his car. He kept his distance. Watched carefully. Margaret's car turned into a hotel driveway. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. This can't be happening, he muttered. But deep down, he already knew. He parked across the street, watched as she stepped out, looked around, then walked inside. Not nervous, not hesitant, comfortable, like she had done this before. Minutes passed. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Room 214. She just got here. His heart skipped. Slowly, painfully, he stepped out of the car. Each step toward the hotel felt heavier than the last. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Room numbers passed by as he walked. 210. 212. He stopped. His hand hovered near the door. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he didn't know what was inside, but because once he opened that door, there was no going back. He exhaled slowly. Then, voices. Laughter. A man's voice. Mark. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. Not anger. Not rage. Something colder. Control. He stepped back. Didn't knock. Didn't open the door. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started recording. Every second. Every sound. Every proof he would need. Because this wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was confirmation. And Daniel wasn't going to react emotionally. He was going to respond strategically. Inside that room, They thought they were getting away with it. They thought he was weak, broken, finished. But what they didn't know was that Daniel Kingsley wasn't just a man who lost everything. He was a man who had planned for everything. And now, the game had officially begun. But here's the real question. If you were in Daniel's position right now, would you walk away, or would you make them regret it? Let me know in the comments. Because what Daniel chose to do next would change all their lives forever. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car long after the lights in room 214 went off, his phone still in his hand, replaying the recording over and over again. Laughter, whispers, Mark's voice, Margaret's voice. There was no misunderstanding it, no twisting it, no explaining it away. It was real, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel allowed himself to feel it. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, but it didn't explode. It settled, cold, controlled. By the time the sun began to rise, Daniel had already made up his mind. This wasn't going to be emotional. It was going to be precise, calculated, final. The next morning, he walked into the apartment like nothing had happened. Margaret was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up briefly. "You're up early." Daniel nodded. "Couldn't sleep." She muttered, uninterested. Not even a question. Not even concern. Just distance. Daniel studied her quietly. The same woman who once claimed she loved peace, honesty, real connection. Now lying without hesitation. Sitting across from him like nothing had changed. That told him everything he needed to know. And still, he smiled. "I've been thinking," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "Maybe you were right." She looked up. "About what?" "About me needing to do more," he said calmly. "I've been stuck." Margaret's expression shifted slightly. Interest. "Finally." "That's good," she said. "At least you're realizing it." Daniel nodded slowly. "I actually have a meeting today. Someone might be interested in working with me." That got her attention. "Oh," she said, leaning slightly forward. "What kind of work?" "Just something small," Daniel replied. "Nothing big yet." Her interest faded just as quickly. "Oh." There was again that subtle disappointment. Daniel almost laughed. Instead, he took a sip of water and said nothing, because now he understood her completely. And understanding someone gave you power over the situation. The next few days, Daniel played his role perfectly. He acted hopeful, trying, rebuilding, while Margaret continued drifting further away. More time on her phone, more late outings, more distance. And Mark became bolder. He started showing up more often, uninvited, comfortable, like he belonged there. One evening, Daniel walked in to find them laughing together on the couch. Margaret barely acknowledged him. "Hey," Mark said casually. "We were just talking." Daniel nodded. "About what?" "Nothing serious," Margaret said quickly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Of course." But inside, he was already connecting the dots. Because while they thought they were being careful, they were getting sloppy. And Daniel was collecting everything. Messages, call logs, hotel records, transfers, patterns, even conversations they thought were deleted. Nothing escaped him. Then came the twist he didn't expect. One afternoon, while reviewing the data, Daniel noticed something strange. Money, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Transfers from accounts connected to him to accounts linked to Mark. Daniel frowned. "That's not possible," he muttered. He dug deeper, and what he found made his expression go completely still. Mark wasn't just involved with Margaret. Mark knew about the money, about Daniel, about everything. This wasn't random. It was planned. Daniel leaned back slowly, his mind racing. "How long?" he whispered. "How long had this been happening? How long had Mark been pretending to be his friend, while quietly positioning himself? And Margaret, was she part of it? Or just a piece in the game? For the first time, Daniel felt something close to anger rise again. But he pushed it down, because anger would make him reckless. And reckless was exactly what they expected. No, He was to do this differently. That night, Margaret got dressed again. "You're going out?" Daniel asked. "Yeah," she said. "Don't wait up." He nodded. "All right." As she walked out, Daniel picked up his phone and made a call. "Set it up," he said calmly. "I want everything ready." He hung up. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen. Cold, focused, done. Because this was no longer about catching them. That part was over. This was about ending it. Completely, carefully, and, in a way, they would never recover from. But here's where it gets interesting. What Daniel was about to do next wasn't just revenge. It was something far more dangerous. Because when betrayal comes from the people closest to you, it doesn't just break trust. It changes who you become. And Daniel was about to show them exactly who he really was. The next few days felt almost normal. Too normal. Margaret moved around the apartment like nothing had changed. Mark still came around, laughing, sitting comfortably, acting like he belonged. And Daniel played his role perfectly. Calm, quiet, unbothered. But behind that calm, everything was already in motion. Calls had been made, accounts traced, access restored. Because Daniel Kingsley had never truly lost anything. He had only stepped back. And now he was stepping back in. One evening, Margaret walked into the living room and paused. Daniel was dressed differently. Sharp, clean, not the version of him she had been used to these past weeks. "Where are you going?" she asked. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks slightly. "Out," he said simply. "With who?" she pressed. He looked at her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Business." That word lingered in the air. Margaret frowned slightly, confused, but she didn't ask more, because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't sure where she stood with him, and that uncertainty made her uncomfortable. Later that night, Daniel stood inside a private office, floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights stretching endlessly behind him. The real world, his world. A man stood across from him, holding a tablet. "Everything is ready," the man said. "Financial trails, communications, recordings. It's all been compiled." Daniel nodded slowly. "And the transfers?" he asked. "Tracked," the man replied. "Your friend has been moving money through layered accounts. He's been careful, but not careful enough." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "And Margaret?" The man hesitated for a second. "She's been involved," he said. Not at the start, but she knew. Recently. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked out at the city. So it wasn't just betrayal. It was cooperation. Choice. That made things simpler. "Good," Daniel said quietly. The man blinked. "Good." Daniel turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "It means there's no confusion about what needs to be done." The next day, Daniel made the call. "Invite them," he said calmly. Both of them. That evening, Margaret walked into the apartment to find Daniel sitting on the couch, waiting. "We need to talk," he said. Her expression shifted instantly. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously. Daniel gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Something in his tone made her obey. Moments later, there was a knock on the door. Margaret's eyes flickered. Daniel stood and opened it. Mark walked in, casual as always, but the moment he saw Daniel's expression, something felt off. "Hey," Mark said slowly. "What's going on?" Daniel closed the door behind him. "Sit," he said. Now both of them were in the room, together, exactly where he wanted them. Silence settled heavily between them. Margaret glanced at Mark. Mark glanced at her, then back at Daniel. "What is this about?" Margaret asked, her voice tighter now. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a small remote from the table, clicked it. The TV behind them came on. At first, just static. Then, a video. Room 214. Margaret froze. Mark's face went pale. Voices filled the room. Their voices. Clear. Undeniable. Margaret's hand slowly covered her mouth. Mark shifted in his seat. "Daniel, listen." "Don't," Daniel said calmly. One word. Sharp. Final. The video kept playing. every second stretching longer than the last, until Daniel clicked it off. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Margaret's eyes filled with panic. Daniel, I can explain. No, he said quietly. You can't. Mark leaned forward, trying to regain control. Look, man, it's not what you think. Daniel turned to him slowly. Then what is it? Mark opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there was nothing to say. Daniel stood up, walked toward the window, hands in his pockets. Calm. Too calm. You know what the interesting part is? He said, his voice steady. It's not the cheating. Margaret blinked. Mark frowned. Daniel turned back to face them. It's the planning. Their expressions shifted. Confusion. Fear. Daniel took a step closer. Transfers. Accounts. Timelines. Conversations. Mark's face drained the color. You didn't think I'd notice? Daniel asked softly. Margaret looked at Mark. Mark avoided her gaze. And in that moment, she realized something. Something Daniel had already figured out. She hadn't been the only one hiding things. Daniel let the silence sit. Let it sink in. Then he spoke again. I gave you both time, he said. Time to prove me wrong. He looked at Margaret. You chose not to. Then at Mark. You planned not to. Neither of them spoke, because now the truth was fully exposed, and they were sitting right in the middle of it. But Daniel wasn't finished. Not even close, because what came next wasn't just exposure. It was consequence, and neither of them were ready for what that actually meant. Mark was the first to break. Look, man, we can fix this, he said quickly, his voice no longer confident. Whatever you think is going on. Daniel let out a quiet breath. You still don't get it, he said. He stepped forward slowly, his presence filling the room in a way it never had before. This isn't something you fix. Margaret stood up, her voice shaking now. Daniel, please. I didn't know everything. I swear, I didn't. Didn't what? He cut in calmly. Didn't know he was moving money? Her silence answered him. Daniel nodded once. That's what I thought. Mark stood up too, trying to regain control. You're overreacting, he said, forcing a laugh. So what? You lost some money. It happens. Don't act like... Daniel turned to him slowly. Say that again. Mark hesitated, because something in Daniel's tone had changed. Completely. You think I lost money? Daniel asked quietly. No one answered. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapped the screen once. Across the room, the TV lit up again, but this time it wasn't a recording. It was a live financial dashboard. Numbers, accounts, assets, properties, companies, all connected to one name. Daniel Kingsley. Margaret's breath caught. Mark took a step back. You said you were broke, Margaret whispered. Daniel looked at her. I said I lost something, he replied. I never said it was money. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I built everything you see from nothing, Daniel continued. And I learned very early that the fastest way to lose it, he looked directly at both of them, is to trust the wrong people. Mark's expression hardened, desperation creeping in. So what now? He snapped. You're just going to ruin us? Daniel tilted his head slightly. No, he said, then paused. I already did. Mark frowned. What are you talking about? Daniel tapped his phone again. Another screen appeared. Transactions, reversals, frozen accounts, legal notices. Mark's face dropped completely. What is this? Every account you touched, Daniel said calmly, has been traced. Mark's breathing quickened. You moved money that didn't belong to you, Daniel continued, through systems you didn't understand. You thought you were being smart. Mark shook his head. No, you can't. I can, Daniel said, and the way he said it left no room for doubt. Margaret stepped back slowly, her voice trembling. Daniel, please. I didn't know it would go this far. Daniel turned to her, and for the first time since this began, there was something in his eyes. Not anger, not pain, just clarity. You knew enough, he said quietly. Tears rolled down her face. I made a mistake, she whispered. Daniel held her gaze. No, he said, you made a choice. That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. Mark ran a hand through his hair. Pacing now. You're not doing this, he muttered. You're not destroying everything over this. Daniel watched him calmly. Over this, he repeated. Then he shook his head slightly. This isn't about revenge. He took a step closer. It's about consequences. At that exact moment, there was a knock on the door. Sharp, precise. Mark froze. Margaret turned toward the sound, panic rising in her chest. Daniel didn't move. Go ahead, he said softly. Open it. No one moved. The knock came again. Louder. Mark slowly walked to the door. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. He opened it, and the moment he did, his entire body went still. Two men stood outside. Suits. Calm. Official. Mark Reynolds? One of them asked. Mark couldn't speak. We need you to come with us. Margaret gasped. No. No. This isn't happening. Mark turned back toward Daniel, his face pale. You set me up. Daniel didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. They walked Mark out. Just like that. Gone. Silence filled the apartment again. Margaret collapsed into the chair, shaking. Daniel, she whispered, barely able to speak. Please don't do this to me too. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then walked past her, picked up his jacket. You already did it to yourself, he said. She stood up quickly. Wait, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Daniel stopped at the door, but he didn't turn around. I hope you do better next time, he said quietly. Then he walked out, and just like that, it was over. Or at least, that's what it seemed. Days passed, then a week. Life moved on. Business resumed. Everything returned to normal, on the surface. But one evening, as Daniel sat alone in his office, overlooking the city, his phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. I didn't know who you really were, but I know now. Please, can we talk? Daniel stared at the screen. Silent. Still. The city lights reflected in his eyes. He didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. He just watched. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you choose not to. And as he set the phone down, one thing became clear. Some stories don't end when the truth is revealed. Some only begin there. This is Echo Tales by Ken, bringing you stories that restore faith in humanity. If this story kept you thinking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me, what would you have done in Daniel's place?